It's my distinct pleasure to be able to introduce Ben Zweibelson. My army coming back. Look, it's kind of interesting, the history of Ben, Grant Martin, and Chris Paparone. We kind of formed this thing called the Design Cabal, and it kind of grew and grew and grew, and yet we met because we were discussing the beginning of kind of the U.S. design movement and arguing back and forth. In fact, I argued so much with Grant that I had to call him and apologize, and that's when I learned that he was like, "Oh no, I love this. I love when you're arguing with me." We were doing it on a blog and just, arguing, and then this is what 10 years ago. So as this community grew, we still and we had the inner cabal and the outer cabal, but we have this inner cabal, right? And I like to say it's kind of like the Rat Pack from Las Vegas, like the three of us, and we talk almost every day, right?
Yeah, every day for the past 10
It's
years.
just amazing. I mean, like
Seriously.
on a Sunday afternoon, I'll say, "Man, I gotta send this to Grant and Ben," and then we start talking back and forth on usually texting or email. But that's the kind of relationship we've built up over 10 years. It's just amazing. Not only colleagues and on the intellectual side, but friends. I mean, real friends, and we back each other up all the time. And there's a psychology that goes along with being in this design movement that sometimes can get very hazardous, and we rely on each other to help each other out because we're going in a slump because of rejection and humiliation.
Threatened to be fired.
Yeah, no, can't happen. Actually, I have a long story myself about that, but the three of us went through all of these changes, and we're still going through them. It doesn't end. But I got to say that I've never met anybody who's more dedicated to an idea and has the energy to go along with it. I could never keep up with Bennett. So I've really said that he's really kind of the hub now. He's the leader in all of this, and totally always open-minded, always able to grasp a new idea and run with it, and I admire him for that. So without much to say, I want him to say most of the stuff, so I'm taking too much time. But I want you to know that that's the kind of relationship that was kind of the beginning of the U.S. side anyway. And I'm very proud to have been part of Ben and Grant, who couldn't be here, unfortunately. But he's kind of the inner cabal member as well.
The Rat Pack.
Friends.
Yes. Friends.
Yeah.
Is my mic is that on?
Can you hear me now? Good. And I will tell you that Chris has a tendency of sending articles for us to read, and for the past 10 years, I've read virtually everything he sent me.
Big boxes in his house.
Big boxes of stuff, and it's a testament that he has been a massive influence on really getting me to think about sociology, which is something that I wasn't exposed to really at School of Advanced Military Studies, and even within SOD, there's more of an emphasis on these other exotic disciplines, particularly postmodern philosophy, which really hurts your head. But then to throw in the sociology side, it's just I've been very lucky to have these types of people as coaches, mentors, writing partners, and friends. So wonderful to be introduced. On that note, we're going to get right into some design because it's boring for me to do another lecture. You have to experience it, and I want you to. So we're going to go around the room. We're going to give you an example of something that we've been doing for years. Its latest version is called the JAWS exercise, but this has been done in many different ways, and we're going to unpackage this on how this is useful.
So we're going to get into the JAWS exercise, and this has become a premier first day event for our basic course. And what I really enjoy about what JAWS does, we've provided this exercise to thousands of special operations professionals across the world. And it doesn't matter if it's a room full of Navy SEALs or a room full of international special forces. We get the same thing. And what's fascinating is we get the same thing in the first drawing and we get the same thing in the second drawing, but in a different way. And we'll unpackage that more. What's really important here is that this exercise immerses the design student immediately on day one after we do the introductions and where you can store your lunch for the week. And it gets them into this mindset of thinking reflexively, of thinking about what they're doing and why. And I think that this supercharges the design learning process and gets them to really, for the rest of the week, reflect back into, oh, do you remember that, what we did in the JAWS exercise?
Completely agree. It's a great way to start the course. Now all of a sudden you're introducing design concepts like iteration, like wiping the board, like prototyping, and forces you to just have to start thinking about why you're doing what you're doing, as opposed to just sort of going through the motions, which is sort of the mental trap that we see when you're immersed in a planning process.
Absolutely. So when we talk in design about form and function, most of the time, especially in military organizations, we are taught to really question and refine and gain every bit of efficiency out of the form of how we are doing it, by the doctrine, by the process, using the precise language. But we don't question the form itself. And this really helps break that open and disruptively address why are we doing what we do and how could we do it differently.
But what we need to do is orient you to the room. So you got 4 butcher blocks, 2 on each side, on the walls hanging right now. Please don't draw on the walls. Draw on the butcher block or we'll get in trouble. And I want everyone to go around the room. If you've done the JAWS exercise, raise your hand. Okay, those of you can't do it, so don't sound off. Everyone else, we're just going to do 1 through 4 around the room, repeating.
So for setting up the JAWS exercise, we normally want to take the students and divide them into design teams. Design teams normally operate best at between 6 and 8 personnel per, and so split it up in your room so that everyone can see the video that they're about to watch and that they have at least one, if not more than one, whiteboard series of markers. And most importantly, as you'll see in the instructions, we have them watch this quick JAWS video, and then we take away a really important tool right off the bat. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So what we're talking about here is introducing a very specific clip from the movie JAWS and assigning individuals in our course into a design team. Now I differ a little bit from Ben in that I think a smaller group gets a little more engaged in the process. So 5 to 6 maybe is your ideal group size, just Nate's opinion. Additionally, I think the another important piece of the setup is when you're asking the group to watch this movie clip and then to reproduce what they see on the board, you're not actually asking them to draw what they think they saw, but more specifically why they think that scene is happening, right? Like why is it unfolding the way that it is? And that ends up being a really key distinction in the way that we set up the exercise. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the last key ingredient here is that we know that they're going to go to their favorite tool. And their favorite tool for predominantly a military organization, military audience, is going to be the planning language, words, doctrinally specific processes, as well as things like SWOT analysis, centers of gravity, PMISI, PT. And if you don't know what any of these things are, you might not be familiar with them, but these are the hallmarks of this kind of very convergent, efficiency-based decision-making methodology that the militaries employ. So by taking away their words, by saying you have to draw with pictures, you can't write a mission statement, there's no problem statement, you can't use any of these things, it immediately kind of cascades them into, well, how do I explain what I just saw? And that sets them up for what you're going to see in the next series of drawings as we discuss what happens in this first iteration.
And check out the slide for our full set of instructions for how to set up the activity.
Okay, great. So everyone knows their number. When we break up into groups, this is group 1 over here. You might want to slide it a little bit down. That'll be group 2 over there, group 3 on this one, and group 4 here. Now here's the exercise. We're going to show you a clip from the movie JAWS. Who here has not seen the movie JAWS? Okay, spoiler alert, it was made in 1975, so I'm safe. There's a shark, it eats people. Now, there's a scene, and this is the scene we show you. And I want you to think about the scene, and I want you to watch it. And what's happening here is just forget that it's a horror movie and that you know what happens, all right? I want you to just think about the context of what's happening here. It's early in the movie, and the brilliance of the way this was kind of filmed, although it was accidental, it was emergence because the sharks kept malfunctioning. But at this point, there's been 2 deaths, but they don't know really what's happening. They suspect a shark attack. There's some circumstantial evidence, but no one's seen the shark. They're not sure if the shark it's a repetitive attack or if it's boating accident or what's going on. And it's the 4th of July weekend coming up, and this is the most important economic boom for this island. You have the mayor who's lived on the island his entire life. He's seen shark attacks before. He knows what he's doing. You've got the police chief who actually came from the city, and he's scared of water and has no idea how to live on an island, and he's freaking out about this. And then you have the scientist, who's a shark scientist, and he's like, oh my goodness, we have a great white shark here. I want to study it. I want to see what's going on here. I have academic interests. And so they all have different motives, and they're all arguing about stuff, and they all have incomplete information, and they have this discussion. So I want you to watch this, and I want you to think about, can you, in a group, in 10 minutes, explain what's going on? Not describe, but explain.
So one of the things that we want to address very quickly here is explanation versus description. So almost all the students are always going to go into this first drawing wanting to explain the JAWS scene, but they're actually going to describe it. And you'll see it manifest through all the same types of symbols that will be shared across all the drawings. But also there'll be a focus to try to break the video down, to break the scene down, to try to mechanically compartmentalize everything into nice little categories, to create linear causal relationships. And part of that is because we are geared in the military to think in a deconstructive, sort of descriptive approach. And description versus explanation, we like to use the example of a car. So we ask our students, how many of you have driven in the United Kingdom or somewhere where they drive on the other side of the road, the wrong side of the road? And we say, okay, if you could take the car that you were driving and you could take it apart in an airplane hangar, lay out every single part as accurately as possible, would you be able to find the part that explains why people drive on the wrong side of the road? And they kind of look at us, incredulously. And the point is that descriptive processes, descriptive logics are deconstructive. They reduce things down and compartmentalize, and they categorize. And so you can get a massive amount of information through description. And it helps us with analytical processes, deductive and inductive logic. But it doesn't get into what we call abductive logic. That's primarily what we're trying to get at in design, which is up and out. So this is abstraction and holistic. To consider systems, you have to think about the larger systems that influence that system, which means that you're not going to find a part of the car. It's going to be something far beyond that. It won't even be in the car at all. And so this leads them down the road of, if we're asking you to explain the JAWS scene, it's not even going to be in the shark teeth or the sheriff badges. And it won't be in the beakers or any of the other things.
So Karina's vehicle, even though it's got a steering wheel on the right-hand side of the vehicle, if we took it apart and laid out every part of her vehicle here, she'd be upset. But you wouldn't be able to find for me the part that explains why they drive on the wrong side of the road. It's not in there. Because that's explanation. It's not a reducible part. It's something that's much larger. You have to go systemically, not systematically. And so we don't want you to describe on the board here. We want you to explain. Oh, and the last thing, you can't use any words on the board. Just drawings. No SWOT analysis, no mission statements, no problem statements. All the things you're good at, can't use them. You're going to have to draw. No flow chart. Well, you can do charts if you want, but you can't use words. Just symbols and drawings. All right? So we ready to play? Go to the next slide. And let's hit that beautiful bean footage.
August? For Christ's sake, tomorrow's the 4th of July, and we will be open for business. It's going to be one of the best summers we've ever had. Now, if you fellas are concerned about the beaches, you do whatever you have to make them safe. But those beaches will be open for this weekend.
Great initial guidance. You do whatever you need to. So, this YouTube video, which I pulled for educational purposes, you now have 10 minutes with your group. I want you all to go to the boards, and I want you to explain in a drawing without using words on the boards. You can talk to each other. And the other thing is, just be conscious of who has the marker. We don't want one person to hog it. Everyone contribute. Everyone has a voice. Yes?
Clarifying questions. Are we explaining what just happened, or are we explaining what's happened with that commander's guidance of, do whatever you need to secure the beach?
It's a good question. It's really what you observed right now and what you think you can explain in that scene. So I don't want to steer you anywhere. I want you to try to explain it as a group. Explain what's going on. Why? What's happening? Why? How? What? Please, 10 minutes. You just quickly find your seats, and we're going to move on with the exercise. So in the interest of time, normally when we do this, we go around the room and we ask each group to present, but we're not going to be able to do that today. I want to get to the other part of the exercise.
And time. That's the call that we give when you run out of time to do the exercise, phase 1. Usually between 8 to 9 minutes, maybe 10 if we're being generous. But so groups have had 8 or 9 or 10 minutes to work on these whiteboards to explain why they think the scene unfolded the way that it did. Once we have an opportunity to go around and sort of scan everybody's board, we tend to see some of the same things, don't we? Shark signs, dollar signs, and sheriff badges. So we'll invite participants to do a scan of the room as well. And now they have to become aware of, we thought we were unique snowflakes, but instead we actually realized that we all use the same symbols. We were convergent as an organization or as a design cohort. Why do you think that is?
Well, and we're going to show a couple of those images that we see from all around the world when we do this. Thousands of people do this exercise, and that first drawing, it's almost always the same. Now, sometimes there'll be minor aesthetic differences in how they organize. You'll see a lot of triangles, we'll see a lot of trinities, sometimes we see orbits and whatnot, but it's always a geospatial setup of all these different symbols, and they're always the same. Military professionals are extremely efficient at communicating rapidly, uniformly, and repetitively along the same kind of lines of effort. So when course of action development occurs, it makes sense that all of your COAs meet all the criteria and they kind of have the same ingredients. The challenge, though, is this exercise highlights that when we ask them to explain, they all go out to their teams and they all draw the same thing, which when you then ask them, are you explaining or are you describing, once again, most of the teams will grade themselves and say, well, yeah, we were pretty explanatory in the first drawing. What's interesting is that when we go back in after the second drawing and ask them about the first drawing, they normally rescore and reassess that first drawing to be very descriptive. This goes into reflective practice in that we don't realize how descriptive and how convergent we are until we really have to drop our tools and reflect on it, which becomes the basis of this exercise.
So you just got done telling me that military organizations are really effective and efficient in their communications. But why is that a bad thing?
It's normally not a bad thing when we are in a simplistic or a complicated environment, such as when your enemy is fighting you by the principles of war, by the code of conduct, by the rules, or by some sort of structure where we and our adversaries are following some sort of process, some sort of decision-making methodology that's shared upon. However, when you are facing a disruptive or a dynamic adversary, when your organization is facing an enemy or an adversary or a competitor that doesn't play by the rules and they are changing the system, this is where our insistence on convergent processes alone is insufficient. And this is where divergent thinking provides that senior leader, that commander that's asking for this design, that additional cognitive maneuver space in which they can then generate new opportunities as well as new risks. But we can't get to those outer areas unless we can break out of why we do what we do. And we can't even get to that if we keep recycling the same tools and the same processes. So the JAWS exercise is a really nice variation of going from the group 1 drawings, sheriff badges, dollar signs, and shark fins, shark teeth, to the second set of drawings where you're going to see an explosion of divergent thinking.
So that's a key point, this concept of divergent thinking as opposed to convergent thinking, which military organizations already do really, really well.
Right.
So what technique do you have in your back pocket to help get the groups to push to be more divergent?
So convergent thinking is the first reflex of what we do, and most of the time it's going to be extremely beneficial, and you want to have convergent thinking. I don't want to drive my family over a newly engineered bridge where the engineers only did divergent thinking. That's unsafe. At the same time, if you are in a competitive, dynamic environment, particularly with a complex security challenge, if you are only capable of thinking convergently, it's a danger. So what we like to do in the design course, and what's a highlight here, is dropping tools, taking things away from the designer. And so when you look at why is it the organization does what they do. So with military professionals, the first thing that confines that convergent process is the set language, and the set decision-making methodology is generally linear and mechanistic. How can we disrupt that? How can we break it up? How can we inject challenges? The first thing that we like to do is that blank whiteboard and ask them to draw. And you'll see that if you take this exercise and try to take it or do it yourself, that first blank board causes a lot of design teams to look and go, what are we doing? Who's in charge? What's step one? And the beauty of divergent thinking is step one is whatever you want it to be. But if it's the same as everyone else's, it's really not that divergent.
Yeah, so this concept of taking away in order to create, I like to think about this as constraint-driven creativity. So as a facilitator of this JAWS exercise, what you're doing when you're asking them to drop their tools, taking away their language and their bullet points and their preferred military acronyms, and you're saying you're going to have to use visual thinking to communicate the why behind this video clip, right? The explanation of it. Now we're ready. I think we're at a point now where we can jump to version 2, right?
So I'm going to just pick one group at random, and I'm going to ask for that group to just present to us what they drew. So the group in the far corner here, group number 4, could we have a representative on the spot? Somebody throw someone under the bus, and that person's going to quickly just talk about what they drew. Just a quick 1-minute synopsis, please. Do we have a microphone? Yeah, gotcha. We got a microphone coming.
Thank you. So we basically just try to put together all the different frames and perspectives of all the different people and influences coming up together into the conversation with the shark around it. So we had the money that was involved, the politics of town hall, denial, which is see no evil, hear no evil, do no evil. We had the science, we had the people who graffitied the sign and their perspective of what was happening, and the fact there was 2 dead people.
Okay.
And that's, yeah, very quick.
Great.
I chose to represent it.
So show of hands, if you were in another group, who here drew a shark or parts of a shark or shark fins in their drawing? Okay. All right, show of hands, who drew a dollar sign? Okay. Show of hands, who drew a beaker? Anyone else draw beakers? How about sheriff badges? Test tubes, it's pretty close. Okay, great. All right, so here's the second part of this exercise, and we'll unpack this a little further. I'm going to show you the video one more time. I'm going to give you an additional challenge. You're all going to get another 10 minutes. I want you back on the boards. I want you to move the drawing over. I don't know if these are sticky or not. Maybe we can just put it down temporarily then, or flip it over, because I want you to review it. But everything that's on your drawings right now, look at what you drew, and you're not allowed to use it. And I want you to still try to explain this scene. We're going to show it one more time. But if you drew a shark, or any part of a shark, you can't use it. If you drew water, you can't use water. If you drew stick figures, you're okay. You could draw stick figures again, but not the way you drew them here. So if you drew a stick figure with a sheriff badge, that's off. You got to do something else. And so some of you will say, well, how do I explain a shark without drawing a shark? And that's the important part here. So let's watch this one more time. Remember, I want you to, as a group, explain this scene, but now you can't use any of the symbols that you've drawn. So we can play it one more time.
Any shark expert in the world will tell you it's a killer. It's a man-eater. Look, the situation is apparently a great white shark. August? For Christ's sake, tomorrow's the 4th of July, and we will be open for business. It's going to be one of the best summers we've ever had. Now, if you fellas are concerned about the beaches, you do whatever you have to make them safe. But those beaches will be open for this weekend.
So I think one of the interesting things that shows up in the second drawing is that we start to shift from the what-centric boards to why-centric boards. We see a few different levels of design occurring. First, individuals will start to take a look at the characters themselves and start to think about the motivating factors, or what's driving the behavior, right? Why are the characters doing what they're doing? And this starts to get at motivations, and design teams start thinking about archetypes. They think about what it means to be a sheriff, what it means to be a mayor, what it means to be a scientist, and why would they be behaving the way that they are. So they start infusing their design with some assumptions about the archetypes of the characters themselves. And there's another layer of abstraction that'll occur, so they'll sort of jump up in their thinking a little bit, and they'll say, well, wait a minute. What if the whole explanation behind this clip, if the characters are doing what they're doing because the whole purpose is to create an entertaining film? So now they've made a significant jump in their thinking. Then even beyond that, sometimes you'll get groups who say, wait a minute, it's not just about the characters who are playing a part, right? It's not just about an entertaining film, but in fact, we ourselves are also in this clip, because you can't dissect or sort of bifurcate the act of the film from the observation, right, of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you highlighted one last great ingredient for facilitators to think about is that in the first set of drawings, almost always you're looking at a description when they haven't drawn themselves, when that design team hasn't drawn the self with that image. And I would say 99.999% of the times that we've done this, we've never seen them draw themselves. And when you mention that to them, that explanation does include you, such as why do people like horror movies as a genre? Why is horror something that human societies enjoy as entertainment? It pulls layers back and it brings everything out to why movies are even made in that sense, why that story is powerful, why we have fear. And also it gets into irrational human behavior. I always talk about how when I was 11 or 12, when we'd go to the pool after I saw this movie, I would look in the deep end every time. And I knew, even as an 11-year-old, there's no shark in there. There can't be a shark in there, but I would look because that movie scared me so much. But that deals with a lot of other things, and it's not really about a shark now. It's about a lot deeper issues that you have to go out to explain.
Okay, so before you start off again, a couple of observations from people that have looked at this before. Second time you see it, you're probably seeing some different things. How did the scientists answer? What did you say the name of this shark was? You don't remember? Right, he said it in Latin. Why would a scientist say that in Latin to an island mare? Yeah, right. And then he digs on him back, saying, "Like to get your name in the National Geographic, wouldn't you?" What about the billboard? We had a civil affairs officer once recognize and say, "Hey, the mayor's upset more about the graffiti than the dead bodies because his I/O message has been hacked. So everyone that goes off of the ferry that gets into the island, they go past that sign." And so sometimes as we start looking at this more and more, we start saying, all right, well, maybe the mayor's not evil and greedy. Maybe there's more going on here. Maybe the scientist he admires the shark, but how does that factor in? What does the shark mean? Why is this happening? So let's spend another 10 minutes back on the boards. You cannot use anything that you draw. So if you drew water, shark fins, any of those things is out. Another 10 minutes to try to explain what's going on. So we're nearly out of time, so we don't have time to go around the room. But the process is and I can already see, and you can look at these drawings, the second round of drawings, we go from where everyone basically, all groups draw the same things to when you look around at these other drawings, they're dramatically different. You're extremely divergent. And so this is something that I'm going to unpackage very quickly and give you this example and say, well, this is how we do what we do and why you as designers, when you're doing this, this is how you can shape a design experience so that you can shift them from a solutions-based, convergent mindset, which is what our militaries really are conditioned for with everything that we do, with all of our training and our doctrine and our language and the ontology and the epistemology just operating behind the scenes. And we are, as designers, facilitating, challenging it, disrupting it, bringing attention to it so that you can break it and try something different.
So the teams have just finished round 2. Same amount of time, same activity. We've shown them the clip of the movie again, debriefed round 1, and now they've been tasked with a second drawing. 10 minutes to work on this as a design team again, but the problem is, or the challenge that we've given them this time around, is that they can't repeat any of the same symbols that they used to communicate the essence of the clip in round 1. So the same technique of constraint-driven creativity, dropping your tools. The perception is we're taking things away from you, but we're doing it for your own creativity, right? You get some groans and some moans, but people will sort of pick up on it pretty quickly, I think, in general, and that they realize that through the constraint, it actually helps them create new possibility space. What are some of your additional observations about how round 2 plays out?
So as a facilitator, what I enjoy about the transitions from round 1 to round 2 is I encourage them to draw everything on round 1. And so some groups will get really excited. They'll just draw and draw and draw. And they keep adding things, and I don't care what they draw, honestly. I mean, we would never say that, but it's irrelevant what they do in that first drawing because all those things that accumulate on that first board become the tools that are dropped. And what's fascinating is sometimes a group will draw lots of things. They'll draw almost everything in that scene, and then they kind of have this look of fear and frustration and panic when you say, "Yep, all that's off limits. Do your second drawing." Now we do let them do stick figures, but everything else is gone, to include water. Always make sure to say, hey, if you drew any type of water, water is gone. But what happens though, what's fascinating to me is that as soon as you have them drop those concepts, those symbols, they now have extinguished essentially the first tier of favorite symbols, of preferred techniques. And that's after we've already taken away their most favorite thing, which are military words and jargon. Now we're moving them into the abyss, into the area of divergent thinking, because they have no other option. Almost everybody draws a shark, guaranteed, or a part of a shark. So shark is going to be off limits for the second drawing, which begs the question of, how do I draw the shark in this scene if I can't draw a shark? And if you eavesdrop on any of the design teams, you'll hear generally the same thing, which is, well, what's really going on here? Why are they scared of the shark, and why are they trying to do what they do? And suddenly now you're getting into the why-centric discussions. And what the JAWS exercise really does is, the second drawing, you can't get there unless we drop the tools of the first. And most importantly, in terms of how we approach this in terms of education, if we didn't have the tool dropping requirements, you just get more and more first-generation drawings. So if we never said, you can recycle the same stuff, here's what you'd get. Just like in course of action development, which is part of the military decision-making process, you would get CO 1, 2, and 3 in different variations each time you wargamed. And you'd say, well, do a new CO 1, and it would be almost exactly the same. It would have $signs, sheriff badges, and shark teeth, just in a slightly different organization, maybe following a different principle of war or a different technique. But they would be the same.
So at this point in the exercise, I like to cite General McChrystal's book, Team of Teams, where he actually refers to whiteboards as organizational mirrors.
Yes.
They mirror back to these design teams their frames, right? Because no design team is actually explaining why the clip is unfolding the way that it is. They're telling you how they see the world, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think about the role of whiteboards as organizational mirrors? But then also tell us a little bit about this concept, or we often hear a phrase, going above the board. When you offer design teams that guidance, what are you talking about?
So going above the board is, as a facilitator, you're looking at what the design team does, and this whole exercise, the premise of it is that we can do this. So when you're facilitating and you see the first set of drawings, I guarantee they're always going to have those same ingredients that you've already shown you a variety of. Now they might be slightly arranged differently, there might be some unique creative composition, but they're still going to have the same raw ingredients. And so above the board, we're dealing with, why do all these students always do this based upon this iconic clip? And by taking away what they draw on the first board, we move to the second board. Now above the board on the second board, you're going to see very different things occurring across all the teams. So we go from complete convergence to complete divergence. And above the board, you can now look at what the students are doing and ask them, well, why did you end up drawing that?
So this presupposes there's value in the metaphorical interpretation of the scene. Mm-hmm. Why do you try to push groups to be metaphorical in their thinking when they're doing design?
When we talk about innovation, when we talk about creativity, when you look at the process, which in retrospect it's always linear, we can always go, well, of course Blockbuster was going to go out of business. Of course Uber was going to do what it did. Of course KB Toys and Sears and all these things. But we're looking at them in retrospect. And when you actually go to that moment of innovation that occurs, you can't distinguish a true visionary, a maverick, with a crackpot, with someone who has no idea what they're doing, that they're actually a tremendous risk. And the difficulty there is that that's in the space of divergence between what is needed but does not yet exist, which is a design fundamental, and the risk of experimentation and prototyping that leads to stepping stones, if you will, what Ken Stanley talks about in How Greatness Cannot Be Planned, that there's this non-linear emergent process of experimenting and failing to lead you to these new ideas. And so the challenge is that you can only get there in the second drawing, that mindset of the second drawing. The first drawing, we are convergent, we're reusing the same tools better and better. We can increase our efficiencies, which is good, unless increasing our efficiencies just make us more right at being wrong. I'm sorry to misquote Aikoff.
So something I like about round 1 versus round 2 is that initial convergence we see in round 1, where all the groups have sort of created some version of the same thing, right? Shark fins, dollar signs, and sheriff badges, right? But in round 2, we hit this sweet spot of divergence where conceptually they're still speaking about the same video clip, but they've likely moved up a level of abstraction. They've likely become more metaphorical and more explanatory in their thinking. But then also, if you scan the room, no two boards are the same anymore.
Absolutely. And so when finally, the important part of this is that just by the first hour of the first day in design, we have gone from complete convergence, which all the drawings look the same, talking about why that is and why we're pre-tuned to do that, and then shifting out by dropping tools, and you end up not necessarily with better drawings, but very different drawings. And so at the end of the day, and we have a 5-day course, so at the end of the day by Friday, you want to provide that design sponsor with a wide range of different ideas, of which some might be terrible ideas or dead ends, and others might be stepping stones to truly creative emergent potentials. And providing that commander a huge range of stepping stones in very different directions, that's the essence of design. And without that, you just end up with all the rocks in a pile on an island, and we're not going anywhere. We're staying right here, and that's not what design is for.